My friend wants to date me after his girlfriend left him because his toxic family attacked her and tried to rob her, but now we've sent him away because he wants us to help his brother get out of jail. Note, real names are not used for obvious reasons. I, 30, have a close friend from college whom I'll call Marlon, 31. We went to college together, graduated together, and still see each other during lunch breaks, as our office buildings are only a 5-minute walk from each other. I work for the federal government, and he works at an investment firm. Last October, I let Marlon move in with me after his girlfriend Peg broke up with him and kicked him out of her house. Peg is Jewish, openly bisexual, liberal, a tattoo artist, and owns her own tattoo studio, with her body beautifully covered in tattoos and jet black hair. Unlike Marlon, she stands up for herself, knows how to defend herself, and can sometimes be argumentative. A little context on why they broke up. Marlon comes from a traditional evangelical family from Mississippi. His family moved to the Bay Area in 2020 during the pandemic to be closer to him, or more specifically, so he could support them better. Marlon's mother receives welfare. His father lives off Social Security, and his 35-year-old brother Ryan is unemployed, depending on Marlon and his parents to survive. Marlon's parents and brother live in a 2-bedroom apartment, while Marlon, as mentioned, now lives at my place but previously lived with Peg. Marlon's family is toxic. They treat him with little to no respect, constantly criticize him, and spoil Ryan. They always find reasons to attack, criticize, and ridicule him. Even though Marlon is the only one in his family who went to college, he pays his parents rent, groceries, internet, expenses, etc. During their relationship, Peg and Marlon had a rule not to get involved in each other's family matters, as long as it didn't directly affect them. Peg expressed her concern to Marlon several times about how his family treated him, but she chose not to push it due to their agreement, and because, at the time, Marlon's family wasn't directly interfering in their lives. Peg also tried to avoid contact or communication with Marlon's family, as she was disgusted by how they treated him. When she tried to defend him, Marlon himself would silence her and ask her not to raise her voice to his parents. Furthermore, on one of the few occasions Peg met his family, she got into an argument with Marlon's parents because his mother made sarcastic comments about her tattoos and demanded she remove the pride flag, the Ukrainian flag, and the BLM sign from her studio. Marlon's parents also disliked that Peg owned her own home, inherited from her grandfather. They believed it was emasculating for a woman to own her own house and business. Separately, Marlon also once told me that his parents didn't like that Peg was Jewish and that they would accept her if she removed all the tattoos covering much of her body, stopped being Jewish, and lived according to the traditional evangelical lifestyle with which Marlon and Ryan were raised. They basically wanted Peg to convert and become a submissive traditional wife. Marlon did a terrible job defending his ex, trying to fix the situation by timidly asking her to cover her tattoos and remove the flags from her studio as a compromise to keep the peace. She refused and told him she would end the relationship if he kept insisting. It's worth noting that Marlon, on his own, is a genuinely kind, intelligent, and supportive person, and he was there for me during a difficult time in my freshman year of college. When his family isn't around, he thrives and is very independent. But since his family moved to California and re-entered his life, it's as if they've sucked the energy out of him. Peg, I, and other friends have also talked to him about this, urging him to cut ties with them. But he's so desperate for their approval and validation that he doesn't listen. He always says things like, maybe if I try a little harder, or they're going to change soon. After a while, it becomes useless to keep pushing. Everything changed when Marlon's family started demanding more money due to his mother's credit card debts and shopping habits, plus his parents spent a good portion of the money Marlon gave them to travel the country and attend rallies during last year's presidential elections. When Marlon could no longer give them more money, they then went after Peg, trying to contact her and demanding that, as his son's girlfriend, she also had to contribute to supporting them. Peg initially tried to ignore them, but everything came to a head when Marlon's mother and his brother Ryan went to her tattoo studio, demanding she give them money. According to Peg, they believed that since she was his girlfriend, what was hers was also Marlon's, and what was Marlon's was theirs. Marlon's mother screamed that they needed money to pay their debts. Peg called 911 when Ryan jumped the counter and tried to force open the cash register. However, while she was on the phone, Marlon's mother hit Peg in the face and tried to snatch her phone. Apparently, Peg's friend, the barber, whose shop is directly across the street, saw what was happening and, along with 2 of his clients, ran to help her. The barber and his friends managed to restrain Ryan, and Peg was able to finish her 911 call, while Marlon's mother shouted insults, calling the barber who was holding Ryan the N-word. And she called Peg a Jewish drug addict prostitute. Marlon's mother and brother were arrested. Peg told the officers she would press charges, as Ryan attempted to rob her, and Marlon's mother's hit caused her a bleeding lip and a mild concussion. As for my personal relationship with Peg, we are only acquaintances. We've seen each other a couple of times at social events related to Marlon, and we follow each other on Facebook and Instagram, but nothing more. After Marlon talked about their breakup, out of curiosity, I messaged Peg for her version of events. She asked me to meet at a tea shop in Union Square and told me what happened, filling in the gaps Marlon had left. Peg told me that after pressing charges and requesting a restraining order against Marlon's family, He practically started begging her to withdraw her statement, to drop the order, to tell the police she had made it all up, despite the security camera footage she had provided to the police, and to simply make peace, as he didn't want to lose his family. Peg said Marlon didn't even ask if she was okay or apologize for what his relatives did. That's why Peg broke up with Marlon right then and there. He pleaded with her not to leave him, but Peg reminded him that he always chose his family over her, that he had repeatedly failed her, and that she couldn't be safely in his life as long as his family was still present. I thanked Peg for sharing her side and apologized for Marlon's actions, to which she assured me none of it was my fault. However, before she left, since Marlon was living with me, Peg took my hand and warned me to keep my distance from his family, and also alerted me to Marlon's mother's strange obsession with having grandchildren. When I returned home, as he was already living with me by then, I admit I yelled at Marlon, demanding he apologize to Peg for not supporting her and that he stop begging her to get back together with him, which he finally did a couple of months later. I talked to Marlon about the need to set boundaries with his family, as he's unwilling to cut ties entirely. I pointed out that he earns more than I do, but he can barely support himself because he's practically supporting 3 adults, paying their debts, rent, food, and legal expenses, and has lost not only some friendships, but also his girlfriend of 3 years, Peg, because of this relationship with his family. He seems to have understood, but he still struggles to set boundaries, and yes, he continues to pay their debts and bills. In case you're wondering, I live in the 4-bedroom family home where I grew up, which my parents bought in the 90s. My parents moved to Seattle 2 years ago and allowed me to live here as long as I handle the household expenses. Fast forward to today, 7 months have passed since Peg broke up with Marlon. He still lives with me. We're still friends, but despite that, I also require him to contribute to household expenses like food and part of the water bill, since he lives here. A couple of nights ago, I was in the living room watching Netflix when Marlon asked me if I'd be willing to go on a formal date with him. In college, we occasionally talked about the possibility of dating, as he's a genuinely pleasant person when his family isn't involved, and we spent a lot of time together, but nothing came of it back then. So, I paused the movie to have a serious conversation with Marlon. I told him directly that if it were just about him, I'd be willing to consider the idea, as he's a very kind and reliable person when his family isn't present. However, I reminded him that almost his entire salary goes towards supporting 3 unemployed adults, his family, and I mentioned what happened with Peg. That said, I asked him, if we were to get together, get married, and have children, how did he plan to support our family while still supporting his parents and brother? Would he set boundaries with his parents because he failed to do so previously when Peg asked him to? And finally, I asked, if we were together, would your parents expect me to support them too? Also, I'm mixed race. My mother is white and my father is Indian, and Catholic, though not very religious. That said, the fact that I'm not white might be a problem for them, and I don't share many of their views. Marlon simply said things like he'd do his best to balance things, and he'd only expect me to occasionally help his parents as a compromise to keep the peace. He also tried to reassure me by saying his parents wouldn't mind that I wasn't white as long as I agreed to live by their rules, at least when they were present. Taking a deep breath, I sighed and told him that unless he completely cut off all contact with his parents, not only would I not date him, but any future relationship he had was destined to fail due to how involved they are in his life. Afterward, I got up and went to sleep. Since that night, we haven't discussed his parents or us dating. Edit for clarification. No, I never realistically intended to date or have a romantic relationship with Marlon. We talked about it yesterday, and we both agreed that while he's attracted to me, he also doesn't think dating would be a good idea, primarily because of my skin color and that it would be a problem for his mother. Apparently, he briefly mentioned the possibility of us dating to his mother, and she immediately rejected it because I was too dark for her. I guess this is one of the few times racism worked in my favor. Furthermore, Marlon still misses Peg and has been thinking about trying to get back with her. I reminded him that not only should he leave Peg alone, but given his situation, unless he seeks serious help first and cuts ties with his parents, getting into another relationship would be the worst thing he could do. Lastly, yes, Marlon and I have a written month-to-month lease agreement. He pays me rent each month, although it's a small amount compared to other market properties. And if he wanted to cancel the renewal, he would have to give me 30 days notice. Both I and a couple of our mutual friends have been pressuring him to find his own place and at least start doing things for himself, hoping that it will at least give him the confidence to begin separating from his parents. But I don't know. Update 1. This is a continuation of my original story from last month, and I'm not sure where to start because of how complicated everything has become. I should probably go back and explain how we got to this point. After Marlon's ex, Peg, broke up with him last October, Peg and I started talking, became friends, and began going to the gym together. Recently, Peg started dating a guy from the gym whom I'll call Virgil, 33. It turns out Peg and he went to the same high school, though a few years apart. In the 7 months since Peg broke up with Marlon, he's been enslaved trying to support his exploitative family. He's basically been a mess without Peg, on top of the constant belittling he receives from his family, especially for not earning enough. He's also said he misses Peg's support and comfort, as she used to comfort him every time he had a negative interaction with his family. Despite me and our friend group trying to encourage Marlon to move on, he still wants to talk to Peg to try and win her back. During the 7 months they've been separated, Marlon has tried going to Peg's house and studio to talk to her, but she has rejected him every time. And Marlon stopped doing so, at least until recently, after Peg threatened to call the police and request a restraining order if he showed up uninvited again. Marlon has also complained about not being able to cover his family's increasing financial demands, their debts, medical bills, and shopping habits. Furthermore, his mother has been pressuring both him and his brother about wanting grandchildren. As several commented on my previous post, yes, I'm quite convinced that one reason Marlon wants to get back with Peg, or to a lesser extent be with me, is because he needs someone to help him support his family, in addition to serving as a shield between him and them, and as emotional support for himself. In late March, Marlon found out Peg had a new boyfriend and panicked. He vented, saying he didn't want to lose Peg, and I reminded him that she had already broken up with him, so that was over. Still, Marlon tried texting her, calling her, and even created new accounts to contact her, saying he just wanted to talk to her and believed they could still fix things. I told him to stop trying to contact her. I even showed him a video Peg sent me for him, where she explicitly told him to stop seeking her out. Moving forward to Saturday, May 17th, I took a few days off work and went away with a guy I met online, whom I'll call Jack, who took me to his cabin in the mountains for a week. While I was there, I received a notification that someone was at the door. It was Marlon's parents, demanding to speak with him. I assumed Marlon wasn't home because he clearly didn't answer, so I spoke to them through the doorbell camera, saying he was probably at work, and asked what they wanted. Marlon's parents began ranting about how disappointed they were in their son for not earning enough to support them, and that they needed more money to cover their mother's legal bills, gambling addiction, and medical expenses. Marlon's father also mentioned that he needed Marlon to sign for and pay for a new Nolly truck he wanted to buy, as the previous truck he had bought was repossessed. Marlon's mother then asked me if I was dating or involved with him. I replied no, that nothing was going on between us. And I also mentioned that Marlon had told me she didn't want me to date her son because I was too dark for her taste, so that shouldn't be a problem. Marlon's mother then responded that at this point, given her age and health problems, she just wants grandchildren, even if they're mixed race. I was speechless and reminded her that I'm just his friend, legally speaking, his landlady. That's it. She then said that if Marlon and I were to become intimate and I got pregnant, she wants to name our baby. And then they left. I felt speechless and honestly quite sick inside. On Friday afternoon, as Jack and I were driving back, I turned my phone back on. I had saved battery, as I hadn't brought a charger and wanted to avoid distractions, and found multiple missed calls and messages from Marlon and Tiffany. Jack dropped me off at home, and upon entering, I found Marlon's room completely trashed, as was the living room, though to a lesser extent, and Marlon himself sitting on the couch, looking more miserable than ever. I asked him what had happened, and he told me his parents had returned to my house. He opened the door for them, and they lectured him again for not earning enough to pay their medical bills, debts, etc. This ended with Marlon agreeing to take out a loan to help his family, and also with him and his dad going to a car dealership so he could sign for the truck his father wanted. When he returned home, he felt so frustrated that he started trashing the rooms. I called Tiffany, who is a close friend of mine, Peg's and Marlon's, and asked her to come over. Tiffany and I talked to Marlon, comforted him, but also begged him again to cut ties with his parents. Tiffany pointed out that before his parents moved here, Marlon was happy, confident. He had a stable and happy relationship with Peg and was doing well at work, but now he's a mess. I also told Marlon about the conversation I had with his mother through the doorbell and how his parents are now starting to affect me too. Marlon apologized and said he would try to take care of it. Tiffany, who comes from a wealthy family, even offered to pay for Marlon's therapy, but he refused, saying he probably just needs to try something else to win his parents' approval. He still justifies them by saying they are misunderstood. I was going to point out that his family seems to have no sense of boundaries, lacks the most basic human decency, and has no self-control, but at this point, trying to tell Marlon this seemed useless. Tiffany and I cleaned up the mess in the living room while Marlon cleaned his room. Later that night, I talked with Tiffany and Peg about what we could do. Peg recommended trying to contact other relatives of Marlon's who might be willing to support him. I am seriously considering evicting Marlon from the family home, but I don't want to do so yet until we find a place where he can stay. I'll post an update if any significant changes occur. Edit. Peg recently posted her version of the story and sent me the link, so here it is. Peg's post. I've read the post made by my friend, user Ayima, where she talked about my relationship with my ex, Marlon, and how she took him in after I kicked him out of my house. And I just wanted to say that in her story, I am the mentioned Peg. I talked to Ayima about it and assured her that I'm okay with her telling the story. However, after reading her posts and many of her comments, I feel I might need to clarify a bit how my relationship with Marlon truly was. This isn't so much an update as it is additional context to what Ayima has already explained in my version of the story. The only new developments since Aima's last post are that she gave Marlon 30 days to move out, that Marlon's mother Sylvia got him fired from his job, and that Marlon is increasingly desperate to keep his life together. So, if you haven't read her post yet, I suggest you do so before continuing to read mine. As Aima has already covered the situation very well, I'll try to avoid repeating what has already been said. I'm originally from New Jersey but moved to California in late October 2021 after my grandfather passed away from COVID the year before, inheriting his house here in Oakland. I didn't know anyone when I arrived, but a week after settling into my new home, that's when I met Marlon. We met at a supermarket I used to go to, and we started chatting after I commented that I liked the Linkin Park t-shirt he was wearing. He had somewhat messy hair, stuttered a little, and to me he seemed like that awkward, clumsy type of guy, but I personally found him adorable. So after running into each other a couple of times and chatting, one day I took out a marker and wrote my number on his arm, telling him to call or text me if he ever wanted to go on a date. For 2 weeks, Marlon and I had almost daily texts and calls. In the second week, during a call where we talked about how I grew up watching Star Trek, I asked him if he wanted to join me at the Chabot Space and Science Center, which was reopening that same Friday. Marlon enthusiastically agreed. We had our first date on Saturday, November 13th at the Chabot. I liked that he was intelligent, charming, eccentric, and simply a pleasure to be with at that time. Since he had arrived by taxi, I later took him to dinner at a Chinese restaurant near the tattoo studio where I worked, which I later bought when the previous owner retired. I told him how on Christmas Eve, while Christian families cook ham at home for my family and other Jewish families, it was a tradition to go out for Chinese food. Our first date was excellent, so we kept seeing each other. In the 3 years we dated, I told him everything about myself, my family, and our history. I told him I'm of Czech Jewish descent on my father's side and Sephardic Jewish on my mother's side. I told him how my paternal great-grandfather was the only member of his family to survive Auschwitz and how that trauma taught us to value family and stick together. I also told him my mother is originally from Israel but emigrated to the United States in the 70s to be near her family here. No, I'm not an Israeli citizen, as my mother didn't register my birth at the embassy. And no, I can't choose which country my mother comes from. I also opened up to Marlon and told him that years ago, I was kidnapped, raped, and tortured, which caused me PTSD and a drug addiction that took me years and treatment to overcome. It's something very few people know. Not even my family knows the full story, but I told Marlon everything in full confidence. I made him promise he would never share what I had told him with anyone. Marlon, for his part, was very reluctant to talk about his family, which I respected, but over time he confessed that he grew up in a very conservative and strict home, that his family disparages college graduates, and that he is his family's main financial support. Marlon used to say he would do anything to earn his parents' love. I responded that love isn't earned. Love is unconditional and based on mutual support. His immediate family was very toxic. His brother Ryan constantly bullied him, and his parents encouraged him to do so. They mocked Marlon for going to college, but now use Marlon as an ATM and see him as their permanent financial support system, especially for Ryan. However, Marlon does have an aunt and uncle, whom we'll call Grace, Sylvia's older sister, and Todd, who are genuinely good people and showed him affection and understanding. He even remembered how his aunt used to defend him when Sylvia started scolding him at family gatherings. When Grace intervened, Sylvia would quiet down, according to Marlon, though she would later take it out on him in private. During our 3-year relationship, we traveled together to the East Coast 3 times to spend holidays with my family, for Passover in 2022 and 2024, and Hanukkah in 2023. For Marlon, the way my family and I interacted was a culture shock. My sister Noah and I could have disagreements, talk back to our parents, or even argue slightly, and it was fine. We spoke openly. My parents respected our personal space and privacy, etc. Furthermore, my parents did everything they could to make Marlon feel welcome. They were very supportive of our relationship, and for Hanukkah, my mother even bought him a gift. All of this, my family being able to speak openly, even having healthy disagreements, was something my dad always encouraged, as debates promoted critical thinking. Also, the fact that our parents supported both my sister and me without making us feel guilty or showing favoritism simply felt strange and foreign to Marlon. To him, he described my family's dynamic as the kind of family you only see on TV or in movies. He always assumed that was fake acting because, in his experience, with both his immediate family and, to a lesser extent, his extended relatives, dysfunction was the norm. Now, after reading the comments on Aima's posts, many wondered why I stayed with Marlon for so long. This is the part where I explain that. During the first 2 years of our relationship, when Marlon's parents weren't as present, things were truly good. I enjoyed spending time with him. Marlon was kind, compassionate, a good listener, interesting, and had that quirky but charming touch. Our relationship, when it was just him and me, was wonderful. The first time I met Marlon's family was on New Year's Eve 2022. Marlon told me his parents wanted to spend New Year's in a real house and asked if I could host, so I agreed. As a buffer, I also invited my friends Tiffany, Luna, and my cousin Jacob, along with his wife and children who were visiting. From the start, Marlon's parents were unpleasant people. When I introduced myself, upon learning that I owned my home and had my own income, his parents were genuinely offended. In fact, many things in my house bothered them. They didn't like that Jacob's kids were in the living room watching Glee, something Marlon's mother loudly criticized, calling it woke garbage that, according to her, promotes homosexuality. She also didn't like seeing my old Bernie 2016 t-shirt tossed on the couch. Mrs. Sylvia called Bernie Sanders a Jewish woke socialist. I responded playfully, "Well, I am too." I grew up in an environment where I was encouraged to speak up and not stay silent. Sylvia, of course, was offended. During dinner, Marlon's father and his brother Ryan started saying that Marlon was a disappointment, with Ryan calling him a loser. An awkward silence fell, so I responded sarcastically by asking Ryan, "And what do you do?" "Tell me, Ryan, which university did you attend?" That made Ryan shut up and glare at me. I doubled down and bluntly told Ryan and Marlon's father that Marlon was not only the only one who had gone to college, but also the only one who had a job in that family at that time. I pointed out that he was the one paying for everything for them, so they were not in a position to talk to him like that. Sylvia then exploded, yelling incoherent things at me, and to top it all off, I laughed, which infuriated her even more. After more tense exchanges, Marlon's family left even before the New Year's countdown. After the party, when everyone had left, Marlon scolded me for responding to his parents like that. At some point, while the others were celebrating in the living room, Marlon stepped away to take a call from his mother, in which she scolded him for not controlling me. I reminded Marlon that I was his girlfriend, and that yes, I defended him as I would expect him to defend me if the situation were reversed. We argued about it and slept in separate rooms that night. He later apologized for scolding me and told me he appreciated that I had defended him, as no one else but his Aunt Grace had ever done that for him. But he also told me that his mother expected me to apologize to her, which I obviously refused to do. I admit that was a big red flag I ignored. That New Year's Eve dinner left a lingering unease in my mind. The fact that most of Marlon's income was going to support his parents and older brother, three incredibly ungrateful and demanding adults, yet completely dependent on him. They humiliated and mocked him while demanding more. And honestly, seeing that hurt me. We talked about the issue for a while and agreed that I wouldn't get involved in his family matters as long as their behavior didn't affect our relationship. However, I suggested he start gradually reducing his financial support. I also tried to make him reflect, to plant doubts. I'd ask him questions like, "Have your parents ever thanked you? What do you gain from spending time with them? Do they make you happy? If we ever get married and have children, do you really think you could support all of us?" Marlon could never answer me clearly. He tried to block those questions from his mind and repeated over and over, "because they're family," as his only justification for continuing to support them. Over time, he asked me to stop asking him those questions, and I did. Things started to deteriorate around July 2023, when Marlon's family became more invasive, especially his mother, Sylvia, who began to micromanage his life. They pressured him to get a higher-paying job or a raise. This resulted in Marlon having daily calls with his parents. He would jump every time his phone rang. They forced him to go to their apartment to continue scolding him, and sometimes they came to my house to talk down to him. It's worth clarifying that after the New Year's event, I never opened the door for them again. The two subsequent times they came, it was Marlon who opened the door and let them in. I admit that after that dinner, I should have told Marlon that his parents were not welcome in my house under any circumstances. On occasions when Marlon's parents came by car to my house to yell at, humiliate, or insult him in front of me, or when they did so anywhere I was also present, a pattern repeated itself. I would jump to defend Marlon, respond to them, argue with them, and then Marlon would defend his parents while I was trying to defend him. That ended with all three of them attacking me just for trying to protect Marlon. Afterward, when his parents left, I would argue with Marlon, asking him why he defended them when I was on his side. Marlon said he was just trying to keep the peace and make everyone happy, that he just wanted to earn their respect. It was during that period that Marlon confessed to me that his parents didn't like that I was Jewish, that I had tattoos, or that my shop had the LGBTQ flag, the Ukrainian flag, the BLM sign, the yellow ribbon, etc. He then asked me to compromise with his parents, to remove the flags, cover my tattoos, and at least tell his mother I was willing to convert. At that moment, I yelled at Marlon that I didn't want his parents in my house ever again, that if they came back, I would call the police, and I threatened to end the relationship, as I felt he wanted me to change just to get his parents' approval. Marlon tried to backtrack, begged me not to leave him, and promised he would set boundaries with his parents, something he never did. Again, another mistake on my part for not having ended the relationship at that moment. During the following months, I saw Marlon crying, talking badly about himself, repeating that he needed to try harder, being a complete emotional mess. And I, for my part, tried to comfort him, be with him, hug him when he had panic attacks, etc. I firmly believe in emotionally supporting the people I love, and that's why I did it. I don't regret it because I would do it for any loved one, but now I understand that support must be reciprocal. During that time, I stayed practically out of contact with his family, but out of nowhere, Sylvia started calling and messaging me, making demands that I also support them. In her messages, she basically said that as Marlon's future wife, I had to contribute money, let them live in my house, and that since Marlon was the man of the house, I had to obey him in my expletive house, give up my finances, but that he also had the obligation to continue supporting them with my money. I tried to ignore her or hang up on her in the middle of her monologues, but when I did, her demands became even more delusional. Sylvia even asked me if Marlon and I wanted to have children. She told me she wanted to name them. And once she texted me asking me to find a girlfriend for Ryan, her other son. All of this was stressing me out a lot, so I talked to Marlon about it, but he didn't take it seriously, minimized it, and even on some occasions, half-jokingly suggested I consider it. Talking to him was no longer useful, so I finally told him clearly, "Tell your family to stop contacting me." Obviously, it didn't work. Finally, last October, Sylvia and Ryan went to my shop, demanding I help them financially. I told Sylvia it wasn't my responsibility, that if Marlon wanted to waste his money on them, that was his business, but I wouldn't do it. Sylvia didn't listen. She only talked about her debts, credit cards, etc. While Sylvia talked non-stop, I looked and saw that Ryan had gone behind the counter, trying to open the cash register. That was too much for me. So, I took out my phone and called 911. While I was on the phone with the operator, I felt a punch to the face, followed by a shove against some shelves. I fell and was dazed for about 5 seconds, and then I realized Sylvia was scratching my face and hands trying to snatch my phone. Doug, a barber and friend of mine from the shop across the street, came in with a couple of clients to help me. One of them held Sylvia while Doug restrained Ryan. One of my clients and another passerby also came in to help hold them back. When I finished the call, Sylvia was shouting racist insults at Doug and the others. She called them the N-word and called me trash and a drug addict prostitute. The police arrived. I showed them the security camera video. They arrested Ryan and Sylvia, and I was taken to the hospital after the assault. I pressed charges. That's why Ryan was sent to jail, and Sylvia had to pay a fine. Ryan was also charged with assault because he used a wallet chain and a chair to attack Doug and another one of those who helped. That same night, when Marlon came home, he stormed in, screaming, yelling at me for calling the police, saying he now had to pay his family's legal expenses and demanding I withdraw my complaint and say I made it all up. He completely ignored that I showed the police the recordings, that there were multiple witnesses, and that Ryan assaulted 2 other people. I had a bleeding lip, scratches on my neck, a concussion, and bruises on my face. And I just want to correct a small detail from Aima's story. Marlon only started demanding I withdraw the restraining order against his family after we broke up. I looked at him silently for a few seconds and simply said, "You didn't even ask if I'm okay." And he replied, "And why the expletive would I care?" He stopped mid-sentence and tried to backtrack. I told him to stop, not to bother. There was another silence, so I asked him, "Your mother called me trash and a drug addict prostitute. How the hell does she know that?" He stayed silent. Then I stood up and yelled, "How the expletive does she know?" Marlon admitted he told her, because his mother wanted to have something against me. I then told him I was fed up, that I couldn't deal with his family anymore, that I no longer felt safe, that he betrayed my trust. I told him it killed me to see him humiliate himself to please a family that would never love him as much as he loved them. But beyond all that, I can't be with someone who can't be there for me, someone I can't trust. I can't be with someone with whom I can't imagine a healthy future. I said that as tears streamed down my face and told him I was breaking up with him because I couldn't take it anymore, and it hurt too much to stay by his side. Marlon then tried to backtrack again, begging me not to break up with him, saying things like, "We can talk about this and we can make it work if we just talk." But when he said, "I want to keep my family and you happy, so if we..." I yelled, "I haven't been happy with you for the past 15 months. Marlon then asked, "Could you pretend to be happy?" I responded by asking him, "Is that what you do with your parents? Do you pretend you're happy with them?" Marlon had no response. Then I took a deep breath and composed myself enough to tell Marlon to pack his things, that he had 4 days to get out of my house, and that when I returned, I didn't want to see him or his belongings in my house. Then I went to my room, put my things and my laptop in a backpack, and went to Tiffany's house, where I asked her and her husband if I could stay for a few days while Marlon moved out. They kindly agreed. Throughout the night, Marlon bombarded me with calls, messages, and texts, begging me to just talk about it. I only responded twice, once by text and once on Facebook, telling him that if he was still in my house by Wednesday, I would call the police and file a restraining order against him too. On Monday, I received a call from Aima, who told me that, albeit with reservations, she agreed to let Marlon move in with her. We talked briefly about when he would move, what of his belongings were still at my house, and agreed that I would forward any packages or mail addressed to him. On Wednesday, I asked Tiffany's husband, Christian, to drive me home because I didn't want to go back alone, just in case Marlon or anyone from his family was still there. When we arrived, Marlon's car and all his belongings were gone. Christian even helped me change the locks while he was there. A few days after Marlon moved in with Aima, she contacted me to ask if we could talk. We met for a drink and I told her most of what had happened. I also warned her to set clear boundaries with Marlon and to keep his family away for her own safety. And in case you're wondering, Yes, I'm doing well now. In the almost 8 months since I broke up with Marlon, he tried to contact me until March of this year, sending messages from different accounts and even showing up at my house and business about 4 times, saying he wanted to talk. I usually told him to leave or simply ignored him. And after he delivered what I assumed was a rehearsed speech that I no longer even listened to, he would leave. Ayima and Tiffany have also promised me they'll do their best to keep Marlon and especially his family away from me, considering I have a current restraining order against them. On another note, I'm now dating a guy named Virgil. We went to the same high school, though he was a few years ahead. We reconnected last June when I discovered he had moved to California and that we went to the same gym. He told me he had moved for work, and we started going out for coffee, catching up, and I showed him around the city, but just as friends, as I was still with Marlon back then. We didn't start dating as a couple until March of this year. I haven't told Ayima this yet, but the last time I ran into Marlon was a couple of weeks after I started dating Virgil. Virgil was driving me back home, and as we pulled into the driveway, I saw Marlon sitting on the porch. I got out of the car and asked him what he was doing there. He told me the house key I had given him years ago no longer worked. Marlon then tried to talk to me, but what he was saying made no sense. He jumped between phrases like, "I just want to talk. How could you do this to us?" asking me for a second chance and telling me he could forgive me for dating another man if I gave him another chance. Virgil told him to back off, but Marlon completely ignored him and kept yelling things at me, telling me his mother still followed me on Instagram. I guess she created another fake account to harass me, but I'm not sure, and that she didn't approve of me dating a black man. Virgil is mixed race, his mother is white, and his father is black. So, I immediately interrupted him and told him I never cared what his mother thought, that we were no longer together, and that he needed to leave. The whole time I was trying to keep Virgil away from him, placing myself between the two, as I didn't want them to fight. I also told Virgil to ignore him, that I would explain everything once we were inside. As Virgil and I entered the house, Marlon started screaming desperately, telling me I was still his girlfriend, that I was ruining our chances of getting back together, etc. Then he turned to Virgil and said, "Did you know she's a drug addict and a criminal?" Hearing that, I turned around, pushed him against a pillar, and Marlon, trying to justify himself, said he only said it to get my attention and that he just wanted to talk. I composed myself, took a deep breath, and told Marlon that if he ever showed up at my house or business uninvited again, I would take him to court. I would get another restraining order against him and inform his boss that he's been using his sick days to harass me, and also have my lawyer send that information to his company so they take it seriously. I also reminded him that if he loses his job, he won't be able to support his parents. Afterward, I calmed down. I told Marlon that I still think he needs to cut off all contact with his parents, reminding him that his mother and brother ruined his relationship with me and that he won't have a life of his own unless he gets them out of his. However, I also told Marlon that I wish him happiness, but that happiness won't be with me. Once inside my house and after Marlon left, I explained the whole situation to Virgil. We talked about it. He told me he still wants to be with me, which I deeply appreciate, and that if necessary, he would request a restraining order, though honestly, I don't want to go to court more than strictly necessary. I stayed with Marlon for so long, even during those last 13 to 15 months when I was no longer happy in that relationship, perhaps out of an unfounded hope that things would get better, clinging to the memory of how good things were during the first 2 years. Before meeting Marlon's family, before they interfered in our relationship, before they invaded my life, everything was fine. But now I know that the Marlon of 2021 is not the same Marlon who exists today in 2025. If I had a magic wand, I would wish for nothing more than to go back to the late 90s and have the Child Protective Services take Marlon away from his parents so he could at least have grown up in a healthier home, even if it were a foster home. But I know that's as fanciful as thinking his parents will ever truly love or value him. Marlon believes he's being noble and selfless by taking care of a family that doesn't deserve it. I can't reason with that. I don't know how. Lastly, as for why I haven't yet sought a restraining order against Marlon, it's because until a couple of days ago, he still had a job. And I knew that if I took him to court and requested a legal order against him, it could cost him his job, and all this stress would make him fall even further. Despite everything he has done and everything that has happened, I don't want to hurt him if I can avoid it. Moreover, he has never physically assaulted me or threatened me. I just want him out of my life, but without making his worse. I apologize if my story seems a bit messy. I was writing it all night. I'm tired, and my thoughts and memories are a bit scattered right now. I'll ask Ayima to link my story to her latest update. Edit. In the original post, I changed my mother's nationality because she is Israeli and due to the current anti-Israel sentiment, but Ayima encouraged me not to hide that fact. Edit 2. A couple of years ago, while he was having sex with me, his mom called him to scold him and demand more money due to her gambling debts. Watching my ex answer that call, continue to refer to her as mommy, and endure her abuse made me physically nauseous. Unfortunately, my hands were tied to the headboard, and he was still inside me while he talked to his mom on the phone, so I couldn't just leave. Update 2. Apologies for the delay in updating. I've had a lot going on lately. As many of you strongly suggested, I evicted Marlon from my house by giving him a 30-day notice to leave, so he no longer lives with me. I now recognize that the Marlon I met and befriended in college is no longer the same person. Because of this, Tiffany and I arranged for Marlon to move in with non-toxic family members. I'll now explain how we got to that point. Also, as a side note, Peg has seen my posts, is reading the comments, and has also posted her own update, the link to which is above. On June 4th, I decided to sit down and talk with Marlon. I told him that given the chaotic situations he's been creating for both himself and me, I felt it was best for him to move out. I handed him the eviction notice. He asked me where he was going to go, and I reminded him that he's the one paying the rent for the apartment where his parents live, so he could move into that place he's already funding or rent another place on his own. Either way, he had 30 days to arrange his accommodation. He didn't argue much, as he acknowledged he had overstayed his welcome. I also made it clear that I didn't want to see his parents at my house ever again. 2 weeks later, still within the 30-day period, Marlon came home and told me he was fired. He hadn't told me anything before, but a few days before he was let go, his parents went to his office to scold him again. He didn't say why, and also to demand his boss give him a raise because Marlon wasn't earning enough to support all three of them. Of course, they caused a scene at the office. Marlon's parents argued with his boss and with him. Instead of confronting his parents, Marlon got scared and basically started begging his boss for a raise just to keep the peace with his family. Security removed his parents from the office, and his boss had a very tense talk with Marlon right after. As I understood it, the boss knew Marlon had problems with his family and that the breakup with Peg was affecting him. At first, his boss was understanding and recommended he take some time to take care of himself. But over time, Marlon started getting distracted, and his work performance dropped so much that it began affecting the team's productivity. Furthermore, before this incident, Marlon's parents had already sent emails and left voicemails for the boss, which not only annoyed him but also attracted the attention of upper management. It's worth noting that Marlon had a well-paying job, but most of his salary went to his family's debts, shopping, and expenses. Moving forward to this week before Marlon had to move out, he was still looking for a place to live and a new job. Tiffany offered to let him stay at her place for a few days, but her husband Christian immediately rejected the idea, as he understood the situation with Marlon and didn't want him in their home. Marlon became even more stressed and irrational due to the pressure his parents were putting on him. Anyway, we were celebrating Peg's 30th birthday at Tiffany's house. Marlon knew about the event but wasn't invited for obvious reasons. During the gathering, as we were relaxing in the living room, Marlon simply walked into the house uninvited. He didn't even knock. He walked into the living room, greeting us with an awkward smile, trying to act normal, as if he belonged there, pretending what he was doing was common. Tiffany and I asked him what he was doing there. Marlon lied, saying he had been invited, but Tiffany clarified that she hadn't invited him. Then Marlon said something like, "Well, you guys are my friends." To which I interrupted him saying, "Yes, but you weren't invited, and this is for Peg, not for you," also pointing out that it was completely inappropriate for him to be there. He then tried to talk to Peg, who was sitting next to her boyfriend Virgil, and asked if they could talk privately. Peg coldly told him no, telling him to leave. Marlon then started talking, saying things like, "How can we talk about this? And we can still fix it if you just agree to talk to me." He then added that his mother said she'd be willing for Peg to date him again if Peg apologized for causing Ryan, Marlon's older brother, to end up in jail for trying to rob Peg's tattoo studio last year, and if Peg withdrew the restraining order against his mother. Marlon even tried to remind Peg that she was also a criminal, as she was arrested for disorderly conduct during a Black Lives Matter protest in New York in 2020, for which she paid a fine. Marlon believes it's not fair that his brother is in prison for trying to rob Peg's studio. Furthermore, Marlon mentioned that his mother still harasses Peg on social media and saw her photos with her new boyfriend, Virgil. Marlon commented that his mother doesn't approve of Peg dating a black man, to which Peg interrupted him, furiously yelling, "I don't give a expletive what your mother thinks." Peg continued, saying she didn't want to cater to Marlon's mother's whims and reminded Marlon of all the anti-Semitic insults his parents had said to her. She reminded him that during the last months of her relationship with Marlon, she wasn't happy and that she wants nothing to do with his family. Also, Peg said she's happy with Virgil, as unlike Marlon, he does support her. Marlon then tried to grab Peg's hand while pleading with her once more, but Virgil stood up and pushed him, causing Marlon to fall backward, telling him, "Get the hell out." Virgil reminded him that Peg had broken up with him, that she had already told him he wasn't invited, and that she had already asked him to leave. Peg had to stop Virgil from hitting him. Christian and Andy, other guests, were about to grab Marlon and forcibly remove him from the house, but Peg stood up and told them to stop. She then said, "All right, Marlon, you want to talk? Let's talk." For a few seconds, Marlon smiled excitedly, only for Peg to clarify that she wasn't going to talk about getting back together because that was never an option. But instead, she wanted to talk about everything that's wrong with Marlon, especially his toxic relationship with his parents. As soon as she said that, Marlon nervously said, "I don't want to talk about that." To which Peg replied, "Well, I didn't want you here either, but here we are." For the next 2 hours, Peg's birthday party turned into an impromptu intervention, with Peg scolding Marlon for his lack of character. She said things like, "Why couldn't you defend me when I defended you? Why can't you defend yourself? Do you like being hurt? Have they ever made you happy?" Peg acknowledged that they did have good times when they were together, but that was before his parents re-entered his life. Marlon, for his part, alternated between trying to defend his parents and saying he didn't want to talk about their toxic behavior. He said things like, "I'm just trying to be a good son," talked about how old and sick his mother is, and said he had to take care of his parents because they are family. He constantly repeated, "I don't want to talk about this and I didn't come here to talk about this," refusing to confront the problem. Christian intervened, telling Marlon, "It's not enough that you're burning yourself to keep your ungrateful parents warm. Now you're also trying to burn 2 other women," referring to me and Peg. He then told him, "Grow up, stop humiliating yourself, and act like a damn adult." To which Marlon, through tears, yelled back, "No!" Tiffany reprimanded Christian for being so cruel to Marlon, to which Christian replied that Marlon wasn't one of her students. Tiffany is a preschool teacher, so she should stop treating him like a child. Tiffany and Christian started arguing about that, and Christian reminded her that they have a child on the way, so she can't keep spending money to help Marlon. Towards the end, Marlon was a mess, crying and babbling incoherently, saying he just wanted everything to go back to normal, but with his family happy. Peg then calmed down and asked Marlon about his Aunt Grace, his mother's older sister, asking if he still had contact with her. Marlon replied yes, that he still had her on Facebook and also had her email saved on his phone. Peg asked him to unlock his phone and give it to her, which he did so she could look for Grace's email address. Peg explained to Tiffany and me that Grace was one of the few good, non-toxic people in Marlon's family. She told us how Marlon had mentioned that when he was a child, Grace used to protect him from his mother's abuse and was one of the few people who was kind to him. Peg asked if Grace still lived in Mississippi, and Marlon replied, "She lives in Montana now." Peg then said she would try to contact her and recommended we ask if she would be willing to take Marlon in. She added that if Marlon didn't leave, she would have no choice but to request a restraining order against him too. Peg and Virgil thanked us for organizing the party and left. I looked at Marlon. I was about to ask him what the hell he was thinking coming here, causing a scene, ruining the party, what he hoped to achieve with all that. But I figured it was probably useless to ask, so I didn't. Over the next few weeks, Tiffany, Peg, and I contacted Aunt Grace. Peg explained the situation while Tiffany and I handled the logistics of sending Marlon's things to his aunt's house. Tiffany paid for the shipping. Marlon told us he didn't actually want to leave California because he wanted to stay close to his parents, to which I simply asked, "Okay, if you're not moving in with your aunt in Montana, who do you plan to stay with, and who's going to support you?" Marlon stared at Tiffany and me in uncomfortable silence for about 10 seconds until he finally said, "Actually, I was hoping you'd cancel my eviction and help me pay." To which I immediately interrupted him, telling him that helping him with the move was the last thing I was going to do for him. I also reminded him that Peg was going to take legal action against him and would request a restraining order if he didn't leave, and that he also didn't have a job, so he wouldn't be able to pay for anything. Tiffany asked if Marlon's parents couldn't just move to Montana too. Marlon explained that that probably wouldn't happen, as his mother and his Aunt Grace hate each other. And furthermore, his mother is somewhat afraid of Grace, though he didn't quite know why. Friday, July 4th, was the day Marlon moved out of my house. He assured us he was able to drive himself to Montana. I told him that Tiffany and I would take care of organizing the shipment of the rest of his belongings to his aunt's house. Marlon thanked both me and Tiffany for supporting him and apologized for his behavior and for the problems he caused us. We accepted his apologies, but I made it clear that I didn't want to help him beyond this point. Tiffany also apologized to Marlon on behalf of her husband Christian, as she felt Christian was too hard on him. So now Marlon is gone, and Peg helped me clean and reorganize the guest room in my house, where he used to stay. With Marlon gone, the house feels calmer and more peaceful. Honestly, I feel less stressed now that he's no longer here. Finally, since Peg has been more involved in all these events than I have, we agreed that if anything new happens, or there are future updates, she will handle posting them herself.